guys, welcome back to our channel. I'm going to get straight into this video. Apologies for the bad mic as per usual. I am saving up to get a good one, but obviously with going to uni and moving literally across to the other side of the country, it's going to be a while before I can get one, so you'll just have to put up with this for now. There's lots of things I need to get in terms of improving the stream, but this is what you've got for now. So today we're going to be talking about some of the groups at Worlds, and we'll just talk about the teams at Worlds as well. And we'll go through my expectations for the teams. We'll go through sort of what I expect groups to look like, play-ins to look like. But we won't go any further than that. I might talk about how I expect an individual team to get on in the future, but not too much beyond that. Okay, let's start with Group A of the play-ins. We'll start with Fnatic as they are. So pre-playoffs, Fnatic didn't really have like a consistent pick and ban. They didn't really have consistent results either to go with that. Fnatic obviously started gaining a sort of thorough plan as they went through, and hopefully they can like scrim and plan a bit better like they did in playoffs. And it was so much more defined what their plan was in BO5s and BO1s. Maybe they did have plans in BO1s that just weren't quite as obvious, especially looking back retroactively. Maybe they made sense at the time, and I just can't really remember. But against in the playoffs, best of fives against Excel, they banned Draven, Kalista for every game. Against Misfits, it was the Yuumi Silas bans. They also had quite static bot lineups with well, throughout the year, but particularly throughout the playoffs, they picked a lot of Lucian Nami or Zeri Yuumi with or Lulu instead of the Yuumi. So there's a lot of things that they changed, but also kept the same. Wunder has been relatively inconsistent. He's sort of sometimes he plays like when he was at his peak at G2. Sometimes he goes back to his 2021 G2 performances where he's getting smashed by Adam, who's deservedly in the LFL and not making EU Masters. I do think part of his ability to play the game is dictated by the players around him. So if Razork's having a bad game, if Upset's having a bad game, Healy or Humanoid are running it down, then I do think he plays a lot worse. But I do think there's also a certain level of critique that he has to take for his performances. Definitely don't think you can put it right on the team. And it's not. What's important to know about Wunder as well is I don't think it's to do with the amount of pressure that his lane gets, whether that be from the enemy jungler, from his own jungler, or the pressure of the game. It's much more down to his. It seems much more down to his teammates' performances. Razork has been playing a lot of Puppey and Trundle, especially recently, and he does look fairly solid on these two picks. He's got a relatively high imp potential though, and he does sometimes run it down, as I was sort of mentioning before, and that obviously impacts the rest of the team. And I think this is amplified by the fact that Humanoid and Hylissang have quite regularly not been very solid, and obviously you've got to have you've got a lot of synergy with your jungler, with your support and your mid laner as a jungler. But I still think he's playing relatively solid. Humanoid again has a relatively standard mid pool. Sometimes he shows why he's playing on Fnatic, and sometimes he shows why he used to be a Mad Lions player. No real diss. I mean, Mad Lions are still very, very good. And Upset is still one of the best ADCs in Europe when he plays well. He looks good on a lot of champs, but he's defaulted to a lot of Zeri and Lucian in playoffs. I think this is just a bit of a patch job to fill some of the holes, although it's not really worked because Healy doesn't know how to play Nami and use Nami ult properly. So I don't really want to see him play. I don't want to see them play Lucian Nami, especially with the nurse coming in for the Worlds patch. Healy has had one of his worst splits I think I've seen him have, but he almost always turns up when it comes to Worlds, so I'd expect him to improve. If I was to look at Fnatic in terms of where I expect them to finish, I think if they get a lot of engaged supports on Healy and he's not running it down, he's understanding how to play. If Upset's playing to his standard, I think they can look to challenge of quarters if they get the right group. I can't remember off the top of my head what their group would look like. We can talk about that in a bit. But yeah, I think they can definitely make it through play-ins. In this group in particular, I'd expect them to top it. If they get beaten by Evil Geniuses, I wouldn't be too shocked, but I still think there'd be a level of shock for me personally. And I know people are going to see that as a bit dodged because Fnatic and Evil Geniuses are both really solid. And Evil Geniuses obviously went to MSI. Fnatic didn't do too well in the BO1s. Obviously, you have to remember this is BO1, so predictions are way harder to make because you can just lose random BO1s. But yeah, I think that's what I'd sort of expect. Okay, so now we go on to Beyond Gaming, who are the second seed out of the PCS. They had one of the most restricted drafts in playoffs that I've seen from any team because I mostly only watch playoffs for PCS. They're the permaban of Azir and Poppy in pretty much every game. Lee Kai, their top laner, loves split push carry tops, and although they brought in Liang into the final game of the grand final for Na, so presumably that's one of their ideas that they can have when they're struggling. Husha played a lot of Vi and Wukong. Sorry, I'm having to keep checking my notes because I don't know the players as well. But they did play a lot of Lee Sin before playoffs, but then they didn't play him at all in playoffs. Obviously, understanding of meta changes and whatever, but it's still quite interesting given they played him a ton before playoffs. I think they played him the most of any jungler champ in the game. Minji has your fairly standard mid pool at the moment. I think he looked best on the more supportive mids, like if I was thinking like the Lissandra. But in reality, even on his more supportive mids, I don't think he's good enough to compete with some of the best. So he's got to look to help the rest of his team, especially in the current meta. I don't know if it's Wacko or Waco. I'm going to stick with Waco for now because that makes more sense in my head, but feel free to correct me down below. He liked the handshake on Zeri Siva, but then in the last game of the grand finals, he didn't pick either, despite Draven only having been banned, and he went to pick Kalista, which I think is a bit odd, especially given it's the grand final and you're the underdogs. Well, underdogs in that situation. But yeah, Kino, who's their support, mostly played a lot of engaged support champs. But then most of the time he won when he picked enchanter supports. Um, I'd like to see if he can play a few more enchanter supports because his win record was pretty good on them. And in terms of my eye test at any rate, he didn't look too different on them. They loved going back to the draft though. They did love to ban Poppy, Yuumi, Azir in their 1-2-3. And so it's quite restrictive. Sometimes they would drop the Yuumi ban to pick up a ADC mostly, or occasionally another mid ban, but it's worth knowing that those three get banned a lot by them, so it's not worth banning them yourself, and that you can really take advantage of them in the draft if you don't do that. Now we go to DFM, the team that I'm rooting for to win the most. The DFM have really poopy macro in the early game. And that's why they lost 2 BO1s against Sengoku, despite being mechanically superior, especially with Sengoku playing Vital instead of Honey, which is just stupid. They still look solid, but I think they would have failed to win LJL had Sengoku stuck with Honey, or Girigiri into Honey instead of the Loney from Korea with Vital, because of how it affected their macro. Like the number of times Vital just wasn't synced up with the rest of his team. Especially when you compare it with Honey, who looked really in sync with his support. But Eevee played whatever. Played a lot of. I'm not even going to go back. Played a lot of weird top laners that I don't think will work internationally because he played like Lilia, Trend, Maud without really a reason within the draft. Steel had his Wukong crutch, but we don't have the records of every game from the LJL on, so I can only go off my memory. So we missed a few of the end games, I think, and a few of I think we missed the third set of BO1s, so I missed a few games. Oh, for those that didn't know, V3 won a couple of games, so big up, big up. Yeah, Hadarong finally looked more in sync with the rest of the team after basically a whole year in terms of league. He plays a fairly standard DFM mid lane pool, relative to like when they had, what's his name? Oh my god. Second choice. He's the second mid for KT. Mine's completely gone. Completely disappeared from my mind. But which is say a mix of champs who used to be relevant but haven't changed much. So like Zoe, Expector Zoe. Obviously Zed's kind of relevant at the moment. Well, he's relevant at the moment, but Expector Zoe. Yusupon has played a lot of he's played a lot of the ADC pool right now, and he's looked fairly solid on most of them. He's even had a Kog'Maw game. He looks better on the scaling champs, which makes me question whether he'll be able to compete mechanically, because scaling champs are often a crutch when you're mechanically lacking in the regional leagues. Harp, formerly of KT, has played a lot of Enchanter supports, but only the standard ones. Combined with the odd Alistair Nautilus game, when he is cool to have a more individual impact in the game. Sorry, I don't know why that went. It had a different impact. It had a different intonation, sorry. I think Sengoku would have done better at Worlds because of their better understanding of macro and they're playing on the edge of limits if they had Honey. But unfortunately, they didn't play Girigiri into Honey, and instead they played Vidal and got bulldozed mechanically by DFM. Hopefully, they can come back next year and Honey gets a chance because I think it was obvious that Vital won't be wanted back by KT. Honestly, if KT get him back and he's playing in LCK next year, LCK is doomed. DFM's mechanics might carry them past the planes or the weaker teams in the planes anyway, but with there being two European teams, the Chinese and Korean teams, and then an NA, actually strong NA team, it will be very, very difficult for them to make any form of impact. In terms of drafting, it'll be interesting to see whether or not they continue with their weird picks. I think and whether or not that works at Worlds. I think it won't work at Worlds, and I think because of the mechanical diff, I think they'll fail to adapt like T1 did in LCK. But if they can adapt, then there is every potential chance that they yoink that final spot from play-ins ahead of either NA, like either ahead of EG, probably Mad Lions or DRX. Like, I'm not memeing when I say DRX. I think they could be DRX if they play like to their peak. But if they play like they played in LJL, expect them to probably finish third in their group behind EG and Fnatic, and then probably get knocked out in the first round of round two. Because I just don't know why I see them losing a best of 5 against Beyond Gaming. Shall we go to Evil Geniuses next? Evil Geniuses, they fell off in playoffs. It's worth remembering though that obviously Danny had to take his break and that he had his mental issues. That sounded really bad. His mental health issues, and he was clearly feeling way off prior to them qualifying for Worlds, and they just sort of limped to qualifying. They were goated in the regular season, and I think that's definitely worth remembering. But they were serious whilst being seriously weak in the playoffs. I honestly backed them to beat 100 Thieves even with Cowrie because of the ability of the players on his team and his own ability. Interestingly, Impact is playing a bit more of a carrier role in the summer than he did in spring, where he was the solid foundation that allowed Danny and Jojo to carry, and I think that's indicative of the drop-off of form of both Danny and Jojo. Inspired has continued to play insanely well on almost all junglers in the current meta. One thing I would say is that Inspired tends to look even better when the rest of his team looks bad, and he doesn't tend to stand out quite as much. Obviously, that's a thing that would happen when your team's playing better, but I think I'm seeing it more relative to the other enemy jungler. Like when the two teams are playing completely even, the 5 versus 5 is almost completely even. Inspire seems to have less of an impact than his enemy junglers, even within NA, especially like relative to someone like Closer. I know Closer hasn't necessarily had his best split, but he still looks like he has more impact. And I think you compare that with someone like not Yagao, Kanavi, Tian, because I do expect them to make groups, EG, because I had them as the best team in NA quite comfortably. Then he's going to get gapped. And I don't even think he compete with Jankos right now. I think he's behind Jankos. That's slightly controversial, and I think that would depend on how the 5v5 worked rather than the 1-1-1 really in the jungle. But that's sort of where my head is at the moment. Jojo. Jojo has shown us sort of your average carry mid lane pool right now. But it's worth remembering that at MSI he became a lot more supportive in his role, perhaps because he lacked confidence. So it'll be worth watching whether or his pool will change when he goes to Worlds. And sort of how, if it does change, how that affects the ability of Inspired particularly and Danny to carry. Especially Inspired because it will make Inspired stand out a bit more within his team. Danny sort of has his own ADC pool. He's been playing a lot of MF. Well, he played MF. He's also had an interesting pool at MSI, which differed from the rest of the competition, which will be interesting to see. Vulcan has been playing really well, and I think he was one of the best supports in NA this year. He's been playing more enchant supports than engage supports, but there's a chance that he can. Well, I think he can play both at the world's level. So it'll be very. I'm very looking forward. I will be very much looking forward to seeing him at Worlds. CB Low, Loud. Can they continue Brazil's improvement? Because I think Brazil's been looking stronger at international events recently, especially getting ahead of Turkey very much recently. Robo, Lavnar, and Sejuani, that's their top laner. And also, but they banned a lot of Jax. I think if Jax slips through the ban phase, it might be worth taking a chance on it against Loud, especially if you're a team like Fnatic, EG, DRX, RNG, because obviously you can play them in the knockout rounds. As they've banned it in their last 6 games of the season. Sedge was played as a flex, but especially as Croc in the jungle didn't play too many carry jumps and often plays to set up in his lanes, especially in the playoffs. Although in the regular season he did play a few more carries, well actually quite a few more carries. It looks like they completely adapted in the playoffs in order to beat the top teams. They were only going 4th seed into the playoffs, so the fact that they came out on 1 was pretty impressive of their adaptations, but it could hurt them at Worlds because it sort of felt like a patchwork change. But obviously, a patchwork can become a fully fledged change, especially with the fact that they finished CBLOL finished as one of the earlier regions to finish, so they could already have been out of their boot camping for years. They could have gone to Korea first and come over. I don't actually know. Tinones love to play the current standard mid pool of champs like Ari, Talia, Silas, and Azir, but he also picked Vel'Koz in playoffs and did win, so watch out for the odd pick. Although I don't think it made that much of an impact, and I don't think it looked that too good, nor did it make too much sense in the draft. But don't be surprised to see some results-based thinking, because they do that, and that might make an appearance at Worlds. But ADC, Branthe? I don't know. I do Spanish, not Portuguese. Loved to Kalista and Aphelios. And then he had Seraphine, Ezreal, and Zeri make the odd appearance. Weirdly, they never picked nor banned Sivir at any point in the playoffs. So that might be worth picking up if you've got a very proficient Sivir on your team. I don't know why I'm saying that as if I'm talking to someone as well. I'm not that big at all. They could never be asked to listen to this shitty mic. At support, they had Theos. I'm going to say Theos, it sounds cooler. Playing engaged supports, especially Leona and Amumu. It's a solid level, but when he picked Yuumi, he looked a lot less impressive relative to the other supports going to Worlds. Still decent within Brazil, though. If I was to look out for something, it'd probably be Krog, because he's an import and he's very adaptable and he has been solid in the Brazilian League for years, representing Renska, Netshoes Miners, and now Loud at a very solid level, often carrying his team to more success than they're actually worth. Having said this team is still probably one of the weaker teams in playoffs. I expect them to finish 5th within this group. I don't expect too much from them. I don't have too many to about how to draft against them, because I think most top teams don't really need to think too hard to draft against them. Although the whole Sivir angle could make the bot lane easy to dominate, as they have seemingly completely forgotten the champ. Chiefs, the team from the meme region. Or is it a one-team region? Obviously, there's a reason why the top players from this region, such as FBI, are in NA EU Masters. In playoffs, they banned Akali and Silas in every game 1 and 2. I'm not too sure why, because they look pretty good on it and they look pretty decent into it. Otherwise, they like to play typical like regional league bully champs like Viego, Zeri, Draven. I don't expect anything from them. I was kind of hoping they'd get put into a group of Isurus, so that they didn't finish last in their group. But I don't expect too much. The one thing that is worth saying is they did completely dominate the LCO. And so if they can continue that sort of form, there is a chance they could upset, I don't know, DFM, Beyond Gaming, Loud. So yeah, with this group, I expect Fnatic to probably top it. EG probably finishing 2nd, with DSM Beyond locking out 3rd and 4th in no particular order, and then Loud probably 5th, and then Chiefs 6th, probably not picking up very many games. Over to Group B, we'll start with DRX, who I was really not expecting to make it. I hardly watched any of their games building up to them qualifying. I fully expected Damwon to be the 4th seed out of Korea and Sandbox to be the 3rd seed, based on the eye test alone. But yeah, DRX made it. I still think they're probably the 5th strongest team, and I'm actually genuinely quite sad to see Sandbox not here. Kingen has started to play a lot more carry tops after the regional finals started, but he's played a bit more of a tanky role in the previous games, which is sort of implied by what I said before. Juhan has started to take over a bit from Pioshik, or Pioshit as I heard someone call him, but I don't think either are significantly better than the best of the West, so maybe this is an area where EU and A might be able to make quarters, because I expect them to make it through. or even Mad Lions could maybe take an advantage, although I doubt it with Armor's play recently. Zeka has sort of your average Korean mid pool. He's sort of a faker Chovy copycat. Um, but obviously to a lower level. Deft is my go, but he's been playing a lot of Zeri, and a lot of the time it feels like he's been held back a bit by the rest of his team. Although obviously, given he didn't work with Deft, Chovy, Hanwha Life team, you never know. It might be him holding himself back. The Beryl has played a lot more Enchanter support than Engage, which is interesting because I saw him as a bit more of a decent engage. I saw him as a decent Engage support, which sort of changes his angle because instead of inting because he's going in too far, he's inting because he's not doing his role quite properly. If I was drafting against them, I'd look to pinch the pools of either the ADC or the top lane because they are more consistent than the rest of the team in general. And the rest of the team do seem to have a sort of weird in potential. Also on the ADC trade, I'd like to avoid a Seri Sivir trade on red side and try to take one of them and ban the other on blue, if possible, if they're looking to get the trade. Yuumi and Poppy are amongst their favorite bans against the top teams. This means that there are opportunities to exploit them if you think they're going to view you as a top team because you know those bans are coming. But it's quite hard to really predict what sort of bans they'll come in with because they've got all of players to completely dictate how they go. And I genuinely expect them to finish second in their group behind RNG and then just walk through whoever they play in that final qualification game. So next we'll go to RNG. They're really good at coming from behind. But you have to ask why they're always coming from behind. Maybe they like it. Bit of an anal joke for you there, in more ways than one. For the most part, RNG have looked a little subpar in lane relative to their other LPL teams, but then they've been absolute teamfight gods. This has led them to look much better than the teams below them, weirdly significantly better and worse than those around them, and then worse than those above them, because they've just been dominated in lane, and then they've either come through with their teamfight prowess, or they've just not. Fortunately for them, if laning phase is relatively easy, fortunately for them, the laning phase is something that's relatively easy to fix, especially if you're able to out team fight pretty much every team in the tournament, which I think they are, because you don't need to create the same advantages that everyone else has to get in order to win team fights. Breathe has that genuine, like generic top LPL top lane pool with champs like Jax, Gnar, Gwen at a high level, but also champs like Fiora. This allows him to play as a goated carry, but also as a insane supportive top laner. Wei is one of the most supportive junglers out of the LPL. He will sacrifice his own game to set up the rest of his team, both in teamfights and the lane phase. Like he will sacrifice himself to save the ADC Gala, which is especially relevant because Kai'Sa seems to be coming back into the meta. Xiaohu is a solid LPL mid with an LPL mid pool. Will comfortably good enough to will be comfortably good enough to shit on most most world's mids. Another goated ADC out of China, probably top 5 ADCs at Worlds amongst Scout, Ruler, Gimigo on his best days, Deft in terms of history, and potentially to be go at Worlds rather than recent performances. In terms of those players' history and their potential to be good goats at Worlds. I don't know what to think about Ming because he's massively reduced his pool for playoffs. He played a lot of Lulu, Nami, Yuumi. Yuumi Nami is just such a pain and he has to stay constantly over and over again. And then Leona, Nautilus when they desperately need to engage. When drafting against them, you have to make a choice. Are you confident enough that you can get ahead so far early and just absolutely bully them in lane? Or be so far ahead that their team fighting is no longer relevant, or do you try and match them and try and outscale them and create a safe outscaling team fight so that you could match them with a team fight with champ diff and potentially get steal a win? Personally, I don't know which you go for as a European team. I know for DFM, I definitely go with the outscaling team fight because I think that's the only way you can stay in the game because you both suck in lane and both suck early. Both come early. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about RNG. Now on to Saigon Buffalo, the VCS second seed, of whom I have no faith. They are another team with a very restrictive pick ban phase. They love to ban Zeri, Kalista, Renekton. Pretty much every game in playoffs, this is what they banned. Hazmed loves to play carry tops, but then also picks out Ornn pretty much every time they need a tank top. BJ likes to play aggressive junglers who go in like Poppy, Pantheon, and the odd Wukong via Hecarim. Froggy plays a lot of supportive mids with lots of Galio and Lissandra, but he can play your standard mid picks. Shogun can play your standard ADC pool, but looks better on champions with great 1v9 potential. Taki looks better on supportive chat. Sorry, I'm just checking my notes of Taki looks Taki. Wait, is Taki an ADC? Wait. I'm sorry. I'm really confused. My notes are completely pooped on me. I have a note that's literally Taki looks better on support champs. Did he play? I don't know what I'm chatting. Um, apparently Taki looks better on support champs. Don't know what that means, but um, I think he played a game of ADC. Wait. Match history. Or the pick ban. Nope, I'm just delusional. Okay, whatever. But basically, he's looking better than he used to. He's definitely improved since VCS Winter, which was the last time I really watched a lot of VCS. The important thing to mention for both VCS teams is that Buffalo won the first series between the two and then got swept in the grand final because GAM had adapted slightly when giving the Felios higher ban prior than the Pantheon. So it might be worth just looking at giving the jungle pool that BJ likes to play and then trying to take away from that pool of Shogun. Because he really is a 1v9 player at times. And especially with his team playing a lot more supportive champs, which they have been doing a lot lately. In terms of expectations, I expect them to probably finish fourth, and I expect their biggest rivals to be Istanbul Wildcats and Mad Lions. But yeah, that's all. Mad Lions. Honestly, it's Mad Lions are a mix, really. They're a mix of good players underperforming and weak players playing to level. In all honesty, though, I think the whole team is playing at a low level, and I think this team was massively overhyped coming into playoffs. And then they played at their real level. Arma has not had a good split since his debut year that I fell in love with, which just really hurts for me. He's consistently looked as a weak point that can be exploited within Mad Lions, whether that be last time they went to Worlds, now. And whilst this does somewhat fall into Arma, also a result of the lack of coordination of the Mad within Mad relative to their opponents. That leaves them somewhat exposed at times. And the fact that their mid jungle is so inconsistent with Nisqy and Elyoya going from competent world level players in their roles to weak LEC players, it's just not helping. They did ban a lot of Zero in playoffs and a decent amount of Renata bans in regular season, with the odd one thrown into playoffs. A high amount of Ornn bans relative to the rest of the reason as well is an attempt to aid the pool of Armut, because Armut pretty much eternally plays carry split or split push plus flank tops, with Aatrox and Kennen being his most picked champs towards the end of the season. I think this is part of the reason why Armut has been seen as exploitable with other teams, because he plays a lot of unstable lanes. And so you just get an odd gank in and put your guy ahead slightly, and he's just sort of fucked within the game. And it makes him a lot hard. It makes it a lot harder for him to win without the support in his current slump. Elyoya has played a lot of Vi, Trundle, Lee Sin, and Wukong. Wukong is the champion that stands out to me because Wukong is a champ I'd like to see occasionally get flexed to the top lane, because I think it's one of Armut's best champs. And he's got a decent historical proficiency on it. Risky is quite a deep pool, but likes to pick Lissandra, Sylas, and Talia. One thing I would really like to stop seeing Nisqy doing is picking TF when his team's under pressure to win a game. Because like most missed Western mids, I hate his TF. Because as a region, we don't understand how best to utilize him. So the weak stats that he has with his items just hurt him. We just don't get him. We don't use him properly to get the rest of the team ahead. This is also seen when he played Nocturne, which didn't work for the Kennen because they couldn't coordinate it fully in playoffs. Unforgiven is probably the ADC that I have the least informed such non-biased opinion of representing the EU. I think I underrate his abilities, so I won't make too much of a comment on him right now. I'm not sure what to make of his recent form and his recent picks because it goes in tandem with his support Kai'Sa. Kai'Sa is one of my favorite engaged supports in EU, alongside Hylissang. And interestingly enough, they've both recently seemed to struggle with a very similar issue. They keep picking enchanter supports who they look far less comfortable on and who they are far weaker on than your average pro support player. In terms of drafting, any bans that encourage global ults in mids, global ulting mids, or enchanter supports is going to give most good teams a relatively comfortable win. But this is not a team that can be underestimated because if Armit pulls himself out of the slump, Nisqy and Kaiser play the champs that they should, then Mad are a genuine threat to make it to the main stage, and I think they could genuinely upset RNG and DRX if they're not careful. And even more so Fnatic and Evil Geniuses. Let's get on with Istanbul Wildcats. Istanbul Wildcats, I'm not going to go too deep onto them because they've been the same roster for the last like 3-4 international tournaments, and they haven't done very much. They come in with a lot of hype. I mean, Starscreen, Holy Phoenix are supposed to be two of the best players in Turkey. Ferret, Serin, and Farfetch have all been pretty decent and have been around for a while, and this has been the same 5-man roster for a while. Pretty much since Istanbul Wildcats, like if you do this, look, all their successes come with this team. They made MSI 2021, MSI 2022, and now they go to Worlds. This is their third international tournament as this 5-man roster, and they look basically the same. And I expect them to do basically the same. They've been falling slowly relative to their what I'd see as their competitive regions, which I would say is CB LOL mainly. Maybe PCS even, and LJL, but mostly CB LOL, and they've been falling a bit, and I expect that to continue, and I don't expect them to challenge too hard with anyone except Saigon Buffalo in terms of making it out of Group B. Isurus. Honestly, I don't think they stand a chance. They were not the strongest team out of the weakest region, because I think the LLA is the weakest region. Before we get on to how do they play, it's worth mentioning that although I don't watch LLA, I generally think it's like quite comfortably the weakest region, and that Isurus are clearly not the strongest team. There was a clear leader in Estral Esports. In fact, I will show you quite how clear they were as a leading team. Like they were first seed because they won. They were 11-3. They were 2 games clear of anyone else in the league. Their record was 2-0 against all the Meh teams, and then they went 1-1 against any team that had any level of threat. And then in playoffs, they absolutely slaughtered Isurus. This 3-1 is really misleading. It was basically a 3-0. And then they just got absolutely pooped on in this 3-2 series. It's a little sad because I'd have loved to have seen Estral at this tournament, but yeah. So Buggy, especially with Buggy and Miru playing for them. Isurus were in the 2nd to 5th bracket within the group, within the league, that was separated by literally 1 win in the regular season. And they are proven to be weak from Estral in BO1-5s and BO1s, but then got the upset. Uln was very important to this region, especially in the playoffs. They played it 8 times in 4 series with a record of 7 wins on the champ. In general, the top teams in the region play tank top laners, so look for carry tops from stronger regions to absolutely shit on them because they just do not play the matchups. The ADC pool was a little bit more varied than any other region, but not in a good way. Aphelios and Kalista got a lot more game time, with Sivir and Zari getting a lot less priority than other regions. Aphelios was actually the most picked champ in the region, along with Azir, despite them both having 50-50 win losses. They were the top users of both these champs and kept the same 50-50 record themselves. This is Isurus. Also, both champs had boosted stats because of the performances that Estral had on these champs, going like 7-3, etc. Basically, but they had like 70-30 win losses on these champs. Their jungler likes a lot of Viego and Wukong, but had the confidence in the region to play a lot of other champs. Overall, it's hard to read them because I was fully expecting this team to be a strong representing LLA. I do not expect them to make it remotely far in play-ins. Historically, the region has always, every time they've gone to an international tournament, finished last or just above in their playing group, and I would expect this year to be no different. This region relies a lot on less than solid Korean talent, and I think Isurus are the only team not to have any Korean talent, right? Nope, they had ADD and Jelly, both of whom are not particularly solid. So that, I need to do the thing order. So I think RNG will win the group, followed by DRX, followed by Mad, followed by Saigon Buffalo, barely beating Istanbul Wildcats, followed by Isurus. Isurus probably not winning a single game. And then in the knockout stage, I expect DFM to lose to Beyond Gaming before getting slapped up by Beyond Gaming getting slapped up by DRX. I expect Mad Lions to beat Saigon Buffalo quite fairly comfortably. and then have a close series against Evil Geniuses in their qualification match, which I'd expect Evil Geniuses to probably come out on top of. What does this mean for the main event and the groups in the main event? So I said DRX would come through, so they'd be in Group A. RNG would come through, so they would be in Group D. Evil Geniuses and Fnatic, so Evil Geniuses would go in Group C, and Fnatic would... I'm an idiot. How'd that work? Evil Geniuses. Then you're left over with Fnatic. I don't know how that would work. I know how it would work with Mad Lions, because Mad Lions and Fnatic... Oh, it's because I fucked up here. Because this would be Fnatic. This would be EG. Sorry, my brain. EG. This would be RNG. No, this would be DRX. This would be RNG. There we go. Got it. So with that sort of in mind, let's talk about Group A. Cloud9. I hate Cloud9. Cloud9 is a one-man team. They will definitely finish. If they get out of the group I expect them to finish last in their group. Berserker is an absolute clutch god, but Fudge is looking underwhelming. Blabber is underwhelming. Jensen is not the player he was. Sven is actually just looking good because he's in a shit region. Like, the number of blunders Sven makes and gets away with is insane. The one thing I would say is Berserker does genuinely have a real 1v9 potential, probably the most real 1v9 potential of any player coming out of the West. Definitely not in the tournament coming out of the West. T1, I'd expect this team to probably finish second in their group behind Edward Gaming. They haven't adapted at all much, and they're very stuck in their ways. It's not really worth talking about the skill of these players because we all know just how solid. Like, Zeus was being called #1 top laner in the world by Caedrel. Ona, it was seen as one of the best Lee Sin players in the world at one point. Faker is known as one of the best players in the world of all time. Gumagod was known as Gumagod and Gumago. Keria, I mean, he's playing on a very solid team, and he's very solid himself. However, they've not learnt from MSI. After MSI, they blame their lack of blue side games for their loss in the final. However, the reality is they can't draft on either side. They consistently put themselves at disadvantages early in the draft and pick things that have already had their counters picked. Furthermore, their macro is barely above that of top EU team standard, which is not really enough to compete for the title in my opinion. Expect them to make it out of groups unless in a real group of death, which I guess they could theoretically end up in, but they're not likely to. I think they'll finish second in this group. Keria looks meh on pretty much all supports relative to the top supports in the tournament, but it might be worth taking his Nautilus out, but otherwise it's not worth focusing on him for bans. For the opposite reason, it's not worth banning too much of Gumagod's pool. He's just been playing on a lot of solid teams, a lot of solid picks. Although I did like Gen.G's approach of getting the right meta bot lane matchup to make Ruler as comfortable as possible so that he can just dick on Gumagod. But this doesn't work if your bot lane is Sven. Actually, it might work for Berserker, but it doesn't work if your support Sven. It's worth pinching the available tanks for top jungle and support because it makes Guma and Faker int a bit more when they don't have the right protection, and it definitely makes them look a lot more exposed and a lot weaker. EDG. Jekyll and Hyde. I've titled their thing Jekyll and Hyde, the ultimate Chinese team. The team looks absolutely goated at sometimes, but they also look absolute garbage at other times, with the most random ints known to man. Flandre plays the typical LPL top lane, champions like Jax and Nara are must, probably the least dependable of the top 3 seeded team's top laners, but that's a theme of their team, is in that they just seem to be not very dependable for LPL teams. They play a mix of Yunjia and JJ. Personally, I'd rather they stick with one at Worlds. I assume something like the Scrim performances, something along those sort of lines, is making them persist with both, but it's been to the detriment of both and the team. Scout's looking solid. If I had one minor issue, it would be that he has played more than 2 of his champs. He's rarely had more than 2 of his champs picked or banned away from him, so his pool across the split has been somewhat narrow relative to some of the other top mid laners, but that just means there's more to look forward to when he actually pulls out something he hasn't played yet this year. I love watching him on Assassin Champions. Viper is still a top player, which is when he's given the ability to carry KM, and I'm looking forward to seeing him tear apart the lesser teams at Worlds. I'm looking forward to him against whoever ends up filling this 4th seed slot. Mako is probably the most dependable player on the team, consistently bails out the rest of his team. Sometimes he also runs it down in the perfect version of a Chinese support. Just Shenyi vibes. No, but this team is very, very solid. I actually expect them to win this group. I might be off with that. Like, it wouldn't be completely out of my mind if T1 won this, and if somehow we got a really weird team here, then they won it. I couldn't think of any off the top of my head that would actually be possible for, but I'm not going to say it couldn't happen. Cloud9, I do not expect to win. So yeah. Group B, JD Gaming, G2 Esports, and Damwon Kia. We'll start with JD Gaming. They don't even have as good a mid jungle as EG. So if EG only got third in NA, JDG would have been swept by TSM. Enough said. No, honestly, I expect them to be one of the top teams in the tournament. Kanavi's been one of my favorite junglers since he's been in the LPL. For some reason, I wrote Yagao, which is why I paused. Because he's great at adapting to most jungle metas, and his synergy with his lanes is just brilliant. Unlike last year, I don't expect the top Chinese team to crumble under the pressure. Bringing in 369 was a major coup. They have a weaker bot duo than the other top 4 Chinese teams, in my opinion, but Hope and Missing is still relatively dependable, and certainly far better than most things that we see in the West. Berserker is probably the only thing that I can see challenging. Yeah, it's pretty shit. They I love seeing them on Aphelios, which is one of their most picked champs. I know I mentioned Aphelios being a bad thing earlier, but like Aphelios in LPL was different from Aphelios in your wildcard regions. They also play a lot of Wukong, which I have no real opinion on. Normally, I don't like the Wukong jungle too much, but Kanavi makes it look good, even if I'm not the biggest fan of the champ. 369 looks solid on pretty much every champ he picks up, and has been important for his team in both carry and a tank role. I think I prefer him on tanks, but it doesn't matter because he'll beat anyone who's not a real contender with 369 on either. Kanavi plays a load of champs and has the best Belveth of any pro player that I've seen so far. When he's played in actual series, looks better on carry champs because it gives them the ability to influence all his lanes. Yagao has a similar champ pool to that of Knight, but at a slightly lower level. And if they play Lucian, Zeri, oh wait, what? And if they meet TES at any stage, I should stop reading and actually use my brain. If they meet TES at any stage, I seriously hope they don't opt into Sylas versus Talia, because I genuinely think that Top would win that sort of game because I do think Knight's the better mid. But then they did that in the finals and they did win, so props to Jindong. Hope loves to play Lucian, Zeri, Aphelios, Sivir, and Kalista, and looks good enough to beat the non-competitors on any of them in almost any lane. Missing's the only LPL support I'd rather see on Enchanters. I think he ints a little bit too much on engaged champs. And if I was trying to draft against him, one of my ideas would be to try and reduce the prior ability that the game that Kanavi can have. He looks good on a lot of champs, but the game is less lost when he plays Sejuani than when he plays a carry jungler. G2, because G2 are second seed. I don't know what to make of G2. They looked really solid in most of the season, but then got absolutely slapped about by Rogue in that final. BB Yankel's caps are still fairly good. I still think they'll do fairly well. Slight concerns about Flakked and Targamas, and definitely could see Damwon finishing above them in a worst case scenario. I do think they should make it out of groups as things currently look. If that 4th team was Evil Geniuses, I think they'd still make it out, but I think it would be a lot closer between 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. I think JD would still finish like 6-0 though. So I've got my worries, I've got my concerns. There's not too much I really want to say about them because a lot of what I was going to say was completely thrown out of the window by that 3-0. I was going to make this video before the 3-0, so yeah. Damwon Kia next. Wasn't expecting them to be the 3rd seed from Korea, but yeah, I didn't watch their series against SPX, but they've been inconsistent throughout the year, and Showmaker's had one of his worst seasons, in my opinion. Although I have heard that he's refound his form a bit, and I think if he does fully refine his form, they have the potential to be one of the contenders. But otherwise, I expect them to be a little bit underwhelming. Lots of carry tops for Nuguri, paired with carry junglers from Canyon, who was the only player to look world quality throughout the whole year. Deokdam's ADC pool is one of the most varied in the league, but only because he has to constantly adapt to the rest of his team. It might be worth pinching his pool if they are saving his pick to 4th, 5th, especially if they were on red side. Yes, red side. Because it would fuck with their plan, because it fucks with their plans a little. Having said this, they typically pick their ADC as 3rd pick, but they also normally try to give Diogdam his counter. If Kellen looks best on his enchanters plus Braum, but can pull out the odd mean Alistair or Mumu game, if I was drafting against them, I'd certainly look to pinch some of the carry junglers to reduce the potential of strong carry top, top plus carry jungle duo. A lot of teams like to pinch the bot lane of ADC and support bands, but this feels a little bit short-sighted unless you have a very strong bot duo like Gen G who can take over with a good matchup. In terms of this group, I expect Jingdong to run away with it. I expect G2 currently to finish 2nd with down 1 in 3rd. If EG were the team to come through, I think there's a chance that could be completely disrupted. I think that would be a very, very interesting group. And I do sort of expect it to happen, but I don't really know how that'd look. I'd have to come back to you once I've seen EG at play-ins. Group C, we'll start with Rogue. Rogue looked really I don't know if a part of it was me having the historical bias that they tend to choke in playoffs in EU, or whether they actually just didn't look that solid. But I don't think Rogue ever looked particularly solid until that final game against G2, like that final series against G2. I think they have a solid chance because they have GAM as their 3rd seed choice. Obviously, that means they're open to a Korean, they're open to DRX, but DRX are obviously the weakest Korean team by quite some way. So yeah, I think Rogue definitely have a very solid chance. It'd be big for my boy Odo. I like Larson as well. I don't fuck quite as much with the rest of the team. Marang has fallen off quite a bit. But yeah, I think Rogue could definitely have a decent chance of making it out of this group. Comp and Trimby are probably my least favorite bot support duo, but that's because I have a slight bias towards Flaky Togmus. Even though Rogue are quite clearly stronger. So yeah. Also, I really wish they'd stop calling Blue Knight their support because he's really just an analyst. But that's by the by. Top esports. Oh boy. If any team, this group could be really interesting because if any team crumbles from China, this will be the team in my mind. Wayward, Tian, and JackeyLove who have insane inability, and we saw that against JDG with JackeyLove running it down. But they also have very, very high peaks. Tian's been using a lot of Viego and Poppy. I expect some teams will try and ban that, although he has tried to diversify his pool lately, and it has been seriously impressive as he's been popping off. This has kind of changed a bit, but not like too much in the later series. JackeyLove is proficient on multiple champs, and I expect he'll play a big part if they are to go deep. Wayward has been being used to replace Zoom. Wayward being used to replace Zoom seemed like a bad choice at the start of the year, before we really knew what Wayward was all about. But he's a solid on carry champs and can probably bully a large number of weaker regions. But I do prefer him on tanks. Knight is a Silas goat, but he has a deep pool, and I honestly expect him to dominate most games that top win. I love the fact that JackeyLove and Knight are on the same team. It just offers so many ways for top to play out any given game or situation. I know the least about Mark within the team. Personally, I prefer to see him more engaged supports rather than enchanters, but that's sort of an LPL preference in general as well, and it does also seems to fit him better, from what I've seen. I think if I was trying to draft against them, I would want to lead them to draft a carry top for Wayward. Whilst I think he looks good on them, it seems it sort of forces one of Knight or JackeyLove to be a little bit more supportive or to be a little bit more exposed, which particularly with JackeyLove can lead some big ints, big ints. What was that? Although having said this, they tend to make Knight take the more supportive role, so perhaps it wouldn't be that optimal to do this. And to be fair, JackeyLove does look good on safe ADCs, so perhaps this wouldn't work as well as I originally thought. Honestly, I think top are harder to draft against than JDG. I think JDG have quite a clear way of playing, was top. Like if Tian, especially Tian playing well right now, they've got 4 insanely solid players, and then their 5th is a support player who's really good at setting up the rest of his team. So I honestly am slightly scared of top esports. Now let's go to GAM. Oh boy, people are so stuck pre-COVID with this team. I actually heard I Will Dominate, hoping that they'd get Levi as an import in NA next. Well, not as a non-counting, someone not counting as an import next season. My brother Levi is majorly washed up. Like he's had a good summer split. His winter spring splits were awful. Maybe he'll carry, because summer split is more recent, so maybe he'll carry that in, and he's been historically very good. But he's had to adapt his playstyle quite a lot. They've had a permaban of Aria Felios, particularly in the last 2 seasons, and Kia, you know what? Let's ask. Wait,
Kia.
Kia has mostly played. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Has mostly played, pretty much exclusively plays carry, like carrying and split push tops. Um, Levi has an insanely wide pool of junglers, and he plays well when he takes over games. But I still don't rate him that highly, and I expect him to get punished by even by Malrang within this group. And DRX Pyosik will probably beat him as well, despite being one of the weaker junglers. Mid laner Catty loves to play Ryze, but he's also a relatively big fan of Corki. Um, but he's a bit of a weird mid laner. He's still he's like the LGL mid laners, where they feel like they're a bit stuck in the past right now. Style is one of my favorite minor region ADCs. And he looks really solid in VCS Winter. He looked decent in VCS Spring. Not too sure this summer. He's looked a little less solid, and he played a lot of Varus and Jinx, even as recent as the grand final, despite that not looking too great in the drafts. So we'll have to see what he really comes out with. BA pretty much exclusively plays engaged support, and their comp pretty much exclusively works for the team going in, and Style being left sort of alone. Honestly, I think they'll be booty blasted by the main event teams, which is sad because this gap is something that's been created by COVID and their inability to play in international tournaments. So Group C, Top should win this group, but remember I said they had the biggest opportunity of all the LPL teams to crumble. Rogue Esports should finish second, with GAM looking to finish fourth, probably even with DRX finishing third, if that's what happens. Group D, Gen.G, the only competitive team from outside of China in terms of trying to win the tournament. They do have one major advantage over China. They play Nilah, but LPL don't seem to play her. They seem to think she's pretty bad. So that could play massively into their advantage if they can get a good Nilah game. They've had a lot of success across the board and picked lots of Na, Wukong, Azir, and Ahri, who allow a high level of playmaking. At times, they were one of the most proactive teams in Korea. They understood the macro at a much higher level than any other Korea team, especially T1. Also, unlike T1, they didn't always put themselves at a draft disadvantage. They had very solid drafts for the Korean region. They look more flexible than any other representative from the region as well. Doran was one of the most solid top laners in the league, and Peanut was good at understanding how to snowball leads, which I think could be very useful, especially against the top Chinese teams. Chovy finally got what he deserves. I don't think he's still at his peak, but still he's going to be one of the best mids going into the tournament by virtue of the small number of teams, more than his own individual ability, and the fact that Korea's fallen off a cliff. Ruler and Lehends is my favorite support. It's my favorite bot lane duo. Ruler, Diff Guma, Lehends makes champions look like the Yumi seem mechanical because he's just so goated on the champ. Lehends probably has the greatest int potential of any player in this team, but then I don't know. I think he's pretty solid, but then I am insanely biased towards him as both a support player and a Lehends fan. I almost bought a Lehends shirt and then saw that the shipping was almost like £100, which was insane when he was on for Freaka Freaks, back when they were Freaka Freaks. I think they are solid, but I still think they're worse than JDG in top on paper. And I think they're probably equal or worse than EDG, who at the point of me writing this didn't look like they were going to qualify from LPL. So that tells you a lot. I expect them to reach semis, but it's hard to say how strong the Chinese teams will be, especially mentally. I like the bans of Poppy and Yuumi against Gen.G because they influence the way the game is played, but banning both in first rotation consistently is a bit risky because it leaves you a bit exposed. So personally, I'd choose the lesser of the two evils, which I hate to say, I'd probably let Yuumi through. But yeah, that's what I think of Gen.G. I think they'll blow away this group. CBTC Flying Oyster. Oh my god, these guys are freaking cracked. CBT, as I like to call them. Um, they are they finished 4th in the regular season in PCS, which is not very good. But they then went on to absolutely dominate the playoffs. The one thing I would say about PCS playoffs is it was really hard to discern whether this was because the quality of the league dropped massively going into playoffs. It seems to happen every year with PCS, especially with PSG talent. Whether or whether they improved, or whether they're just simply bad at BO1s. It'll be worth keeping an eye on them to see which of these it really is. They banned Ari pretty much throughout the entirety of the split, so that's one. Zeri was the perma ban that they had in regular season, but she dropped off in playoffs and was sort of replaced by Silas and Fiora. In playoffs, their top laner Rest loved to play a lot of Renekton, Gnar, and Aatrox. So keep an eye out on those. The jungler Gemini, formerly of Matchy, loved his Wukong and Viego in the playoffs and had a level of stability within the team. Mission loved Victor the most, but he also played a lot of Tilia and Azir. It's worth noting, though, that a lot of teams had perma bans that never got played, and this included Azir in the grand final. Shun had your typical ADC pool, but also played as support Nautilus when the sub bot played the last game of the season with him, as in the regular season. So he's got a decent understanding of the bot lane, and they won that game, I think. Which was why I was getting confused earlier. Koala Pelosi played engaged support. It's particularly Nautilus. He has played a game of Ashe and a game of Bard, with the odd game on Renata. But permabans were common in the region, so the team might be fairly restricted in terms of what they can draft, because almost every team had permabans, and the region especially hated Yumi. They have a Japanese coach, so they will definitely be one of my favorite teams in the main stage. They have my boy, KMT, Kevin Miller, Kevin Yukihiro Isoda Mila. I fought that so hard. What the hell was that? Or whatever. 100 Thieves! 100 Thieves. I hope they lose every game. Okay. Having said that, I love FBI and I love Closer. Abadage is one of my favorite Western players that's gone to Worlds. Someday, I like historically. Huhi, I like. But the way they play as a team, I can't get behind it at all. And so I want them to finish 4th in this group. Because the other team will be Chinese, RNG most likely. They won't stand a chance against RNG. They shouldn't stand a chance against Genji. So I'd like to see them finish behind CBTC, Flying Oyster. And I genuinely think there is a small chance, although I would expect them to beat CBTC Flying Oyster. With that being said, I think we've got a chance of seeing a total of half. Let's give that as a half as well. So 1, 2. I think we've got a chance of seeing two Western teams make not group state quarters, sorry, and I think they are G2 and Rogue are our current favourites, with a small chance of Cloud9 slipping in. So that's it from me and my shitty mic. I will see you for the next video where I will be talking about the play-ins in a bit more depth. Well, I say in a bit more depth, in a bit of a different depth. See you then.